All right. Genesis chapter 27. We're going to start looking at the life of Joseph. Genesis chapter 27 is all about Joseph, but if you'll notice, verse 1 and 2 start this way of Genesis 37. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Then it immediately goes into Joseph's story. So first of all, we have to ask ourselves, why does Moses begin this chapter this way? He's getting ready to tell us about Joseph, and Joseph is going to dominate for the most part, with the exception of a chapter. He's going to dominate the entirety of the rest of the book. So why does Moses begin these are the generations of Jacob? Because the story of Joseph is the story of the Messiah of Israel. And if you'll recall,
I'm so sorry, Jeff. I had to walk away for a second. Where are we?
Genesis 37.
Oh, thank you.
You can ask Madison where that's at in the Bible. She just recited the whole thing to us.
I don't know who Madison is, but I got you.
Or Madeline. Why are me and Cheryl doing that tonight? We must have met a Madison. Anyhow, because the story of Joseph is the story of Israel's Messiah, and you recall that Jacob has been renamed Israel. And by the end of the story of Jacob, there's going to be enough of Joseph's descendants to become the tribes or the nation of Israel. Joseph is in my mind, the most explicit type or shadow of the Lord Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. Virtually everything about Joseph's life mirrors what would happen when Jesus comes upon the scene. So the way we're going to approach this, we're going to look at the story, and then we're going to do some Bible drills into the New Testament, as we will see. So let's begin reading verse 1, chapter 37. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. If you'll recall, Jacob married Leah and Rachel. Rachel was barren, but that's who Jacob loved the most. But Leah kept having children, and it became sort of a competition between them. And so Rachel does kind of what Sarah did with Abraham, and sends her maidservant into Jacob and has a son through her maidservant. And so Leah does the same thing. So there's 4 wives here. They have given their servants to Jacob, their husband. So Jacob now has 4 wives, and 3 of them have been producing children. Rachel finally produces Jacob, which is why he's the child of the promise, and he is the one that his father loves the most. So that's why he's out there with his brothers from those 2 ladies, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors, or a coat of many colors. Anybody ever heard the Dolly Parton song? I know she's got a coat of many colors song. We used to sing about it in Sunday school. I know we would color pictures of a many-colored robe. So let me break your hearts real quick. The original Hebrew, this word is only used 5 times in the entire Bible. All 5 times it's translated colors, but in reality it means the palm of your hand and the sole of your feet. In other words, it describes a very long robe, So if you can picture, you've seen movies, and the characters are all dressed up, and they have these short sleeve robes and these tunics that that come just below the knee. Who's been watching The Chosen? I know some of you ladies have watched The Chosen, right? Just think of how Peter is dressed in The Chosen, right? He's got the little skirt on that comes down to about his knee, and his short sleeve and all that stuff. Well, that's typically how they would dress. Now, also in The Chosen, we see somebody who's fairly wealthy, like Matthew is in that series, or even Timothy in the series, what are they wearing? They're wearing this overcoat, this overrobe that comes all the way down here and goes all the way to their feet, right? That's the word as it's describing the coat that Joseph made for Jacob. So it never really made sense to me. Why are they upset with Joseph? Because his robe's got more colors than theirs, if it's the same robe, if it's the same type of robe. But when you look at the underlying language, you see that Joseph has been given something special, a special piece of clothing that his brothers were not given. It wasn't that his robe was prettier than their robes. It's that Joseph has been given a robe that they were not given, if that makes sense, right? Their father Jacob provided them tunics, and he provided Joseph a tunic and this long flowing robe to show and symbolize that he loved Joseph more than he loved the others. So does that make any sense? Does that make more sense than just a robe of many colors? Although it could have been many colors. I don't know, right? The only other person who is talked about is Tamar in 2 Samuel. And it says she had a many-colored robe. So it could have been a robe of many colors, probably was a very ornate robe. But the thrust of what is being said here is that he had been given something over and above what his brothers had been given. He had been given this special robe. Like, again, going back to the chosen, you see Thomas standing there, and he's wearing a tunic, and then he's got that over robe on him, right? And so that's the picture being painted here. And he made him a robe of many colors. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Turn to John chapter 1. John chapter 1, verse 9 and following. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. His own people did not receive him, just like he came to his brothers, and his own brothers did not receive him. We'll see that later as we go through this study too. Same thing happens to Joseph. They didn't like Joseph because he was the chosen one of the Father. The nation of Israel, Jesus' brothers, did not like Jesus because he was the chosen one of the Father. Verse 5. Now, Joseph is getting ready to have a couple of prophetic dreams that really set them off. Now, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. This is the same thing that happens to Jesus, is it not? He comes to his own, he comes to his brothers, and he's the Messiah. He's claiming to be the Messiah. He's telling them, "I'm your Messiah. I'm your king." And they do not want to submit to him as king. Joseph's brothers did not want to submit to him. This is a prophetic dream of what would happen later in Joseph's life, but more than that, it is a prophetic dream that God put in Joseph's mind so that the nation of Israel, reading Genesis chapter 37, would understand that one who was loved of the Father would come and they would bow down to him. So it's a prophecy of Christ. The next dream, in verse 9, then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, the 11 stars were bowing down to me." And when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Again, basically the same dream, except this time he includes his father and mother. In other words, it's the entirety of the nation of Israel will bow down to the chosen one of the Father, the one that the Father loved, the beloved one of the Father, the one that Joseph is a type of, or a shadow type of. So these are just two prophetic dreams there that Joseph has that caused the intense hatred that his brothers developed of him. So any questions so far on that little introductory portion about Joseph? All right. Verse 12. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And he said, here I am. So he said to him, go now and see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Look at John 8:42. John 8:42 says this, Jesus said to them, talking to the leadership of the nation of Israel, Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me, for I came from God and I am here. I came not of my own accord, but he sent me. Joseph and Jesus were both sent by their fathers. And then verse 15, and a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, what are you seeking? I am seeking my brothers, he said. Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock? Now turn to Luke 19:9 and 10. And Jesus said to them, today salvation has come to this house, since he is also son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and save that which was lost. Matthew 15:24. And he answered her, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So Jesus and Joseph were both sent by their fathers to their brethren, to seek their brethren. That's what Jesus says. I came to seek and save that which was lost. Joseph goes to Shechem, where they were supposed to be, but they weren't there. So Joseph is seeking his brothers on his father's orders. And the man said, they have gone away, verse 17. For I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. All right, turn now to Matthew 27:15-26. So they see Joseph coming, and they decide to kill him. And Matthew 27:15-26 says this, Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed, no, that's wrong one. Matthew 26:3 and 4. Excuse me. That's the next later point. Matthew 26:3 and 4. Then the chief priest and the elders of the people gathered in the palaces of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and plotted together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people. Then also look at Luke 23. Luke 23:13-16. Nope, my bad. John 11:53. I'm getting ahead of myself on my notes. John 11:53. So from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. So Joseph's brothers and Jesus' brothers both plotted to put them to death. And then we read, they said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Come on now, let us kill him and throw him in one of the pits. And they will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay hands on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to their father. Here's the issue with Reuben, and y'all, is Reuben there tonight? Is Reuben with you, Melissa? This is my eldest son's name, because the name means behold a son. They told us he was going to be a boy. He came out, he was not, I mean, a girl. He came out, he was not a girl. So it's an apropos name. Behold a son. So his name is Reuben. Reuben is the firstborn. Reuben had authority over the others. Reuben did not use that authority because he was afraid of his brothers. He was going to secretly rescue Joseph. Of course, we see that it didn't work that way, but he should have stood up as the eldest son, as the one who had the authority in that group, and said, stop it. We are not going to do it. Right? There is another man in the scriptures that had the ability and the authority to save Jesus from crucifixion. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 26. Matthew 26, or 27. Matthew 27. Now we're going through 15 through 26. Now at the feast of the governor, feast of Passover, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had them then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ? For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream. Now the chief priest and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, which of the two do you want me to release for you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? They all said, let him be crucified. And he said, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, let him be crucified. Now, look over at Luke 23, and we'll get another little insight on Pilate's mind. Luke 23, 13 through 16. Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, and he said to them, you brought me this man as one who was misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him, neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him. But they all cried, away with this man, and released to us Barabbas. And so Pilate gives in to the crowd. Although Pilate was the Roman ruler of the nation of Israel, he had absolute authority to say no. But in his weakness and his fear of the other people, and his fear, there's a little more backstory in the history of Rome. Pilate had already used a little heavy-handedness on the Jews and didn't make Caesar happy, so he was afraid of what Caesar would be if he had another insurrection to deal with, if he had to suppress the nation of Israel again, the people in Jerusalem again. So both Reuben and Pilate refused to use their authority to do what was right and protect the innocent. Jesus was innocent. Joseph was innocent. Joseph was simply doing what his father had told him to do, and his brethren plotted to kill him. Jesus was simply doing what his father told him to do, and his brethren decided to kill him. Both Joseph and Jesus had a man who had the authority to put a stop to the nonsense. Reuben was trying. He was going to try to do it secretly because he was afraid of his brothers. He didn't want to stand out in the crowd. He didn't want them to hate him like they hated Joseph. He was concerned about his popularity among his brothers, although he wanted to do the right thing. Pilate wanted to do the right thing. Pilate knew this man was innocent. But in rather of standing up with a backbone and saying we're not going to crucify him, he's done nothing, he gave in to the crowd and allowed them to crucify an innocent man. So that is another way that that Joseph and Jesus are alike. Any questions there? All right. So when Joseph, verse 29 or 23, so when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore. And they took him and threw him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Of course, Jesus and Joseph were both stripped of their tunics. John 19, 30, 23, 24. And you guys probably know this story as well, but it never hurts to go back and read it. When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garments and divided them into 4 parts, 1 part for each soldier, also his tunic. But the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. So they said to one another, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see whose it shall be. This was to fulfill the scripture that says, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Same thing. They took Jesus's garments just like they took Joseph's garments. We see that they took him and threw him in a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. I mean, can you imagine the scene? They have just thrown their baby brother into a pit, intending for him to die in that pit, and then sat down to eat. They were totally indifferent to the suffering of Joseph, just like the nation of Israel was totally indifferent to the suffering of Jesus. In Matthew, when you read the crucifixion account, you see that the Pharisees and the people of the nation of Israel are staring around the cross, wagging their heads and mocking Jesus. In all of his suffering, they're still mocking him, just like Joseph's brothers did to him. Verse 20. Verse 26. And Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let not our hands be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then the Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit. Both Jesus and Joseph are resurrected out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. That time, that was the price of the slave. How much was Jesus sold for? 30 pieces of silver, which was the going price of a slave at that day. So they're both sold for the price of a slave. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Do y'all recall what happens after the wise men visit? Read it in the Gospel of Luke or Gospel of Matthew. Wise men visit, and they go back, being warned in a dream not to go back through Jerusalem to see Herod. And then an angel comes and tells Joseph to take up Mary and the child, the baby Jesus, and flee to Egypt. So Joseph goes to Egypt, just like Jesus goes to Egypt. So he took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit, see, Reuben was gone when they picked him up out of the pit and sold him. Judah had taken over. Judah's the next oldest. So we see right there that Judah had authority, and he exercised his authority. He exercised his authority, said, let's don't kill him, let's sell him into slavery. Reuben failed to exercise his authority. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, the boy is gone, and I, where shall I go? Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered the goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. And he identified it and said, it is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. And Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son for many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. And we will pick up the story of Joseph in Potiphar's house next week. Questions, comments, concerns? Yes, Carrie.